So we're going to be going over the answers to the comparing and ordering decimals questions. So the first question, we had to compare the decimals and write greater than, less than, or equal to. So for the first one, we have 21 hundredths here, and that is less than 3/10 because the 2 is less than the 3 when we compare the two tenths place values. For B, I've got 21 hundredths and 20 hundredths. Well, 21 hundredths are greater than 20 hundredths. C, 2 tenths and 13 thousandths. The 2 in the tenths place value here, and we have a 0 in the tenths place value over here, so that means that 2 tenths is greater. We have 201 thousandths here and 3 tenths here. Comparing the tenths place value, I have a 2 here and a 3 here, so that means 201 thousandths are less than 3 tenths. 20 hundredths, also known as 2 tenths, and I have 31 thousandths over here. So I have 2 in the tenths place value, and I have 0 in the tenths place value here. So 20 hundredths are greater than 31 thousandths. Here we have 2 thousandths and 3 hundredths. Because I have a 0 in the hundredths place value here and a 3 in the hundredths place value here, that means that 2 thousandths is less than 3 hundredths. And the last one, we have 300 thousandths and 31 hundredths. Well, I have a 3 in the tenths place value. I have a 3 in the tenths place value here. So those are the same, which means we have to go to the next place value over to the right. So here I have a 0 in the hundredths place value, and I have a 1 in the hundredths place value. So because the 1 is larger than the 0, that means that this decimal, 300 thousandths, or just 3 tenths, is less than 31 hundredths. Question 2 says, write the following decimals using numbers and a decimal point. So I've got the words here, and I need to write the decimals using numbers over here. So 35 hundredths is 0.35, because I want the 35 to end up in the hundredths column. Remember, the hundredths column is the second one from the right of the decimal. 2 tenths, 0.2, where the 2 ends up in the tenths column. 17 thousandths, I want the 17 to end in the thousandth column, so I need to put a 0 here in the tenths, a 1 in the hundredths, and a 7 in the thousandths. 104 thousandths, so 0.104, it ends in the thousandths place value. 4 hundredths is 0.04 with the 4 in the hundredths place value, and 8 tenths, 0.8 with the 8 in the tenths place value. Question 3, we had to write the following decimals in words, so the opposite of question 2. So here I have my decimals, so I see the number 15 here, and I know that it goes to the second place value from the right from the decimal. So I know the second place value is the hundredths, so I just read that number, 15, and I write the word hundredths after it, 15 hundredths. This one, B, we have 7, and it is in the tenths place value, so it's 7 tenths. C, it goes 3 spots to the right of the decimal, so we know that the third spot is the thousandths place value. So I just read the whole number, 206, and add the word thousandths onto the end, 206 thousandths. D is 9 tenths. E, we go to the third place value, so again that's thousandths, and I just read that number, it says 58, so the decimal is 58 thousandths. And the last one, it goes to the second place value, which is the hundredths, and the number reads 40, so I could say 40 hundredths. But remember that when we have zeros on the end of a decimal, we can add them or take them off, and it won't change the value of it. So I could read it as 40 hundredths, or I could just take that 0 off and read it as 4 tenths. And the last question, we had to order these decimals from least to greatest, so that's smallest to biggest. So I have 27 hundredths, 27 thousandths, and 7 tenths. So when I look at the first place value, that tenths column, I have a 2, a 0, and a 7. So if I'm going from least to greatest, I'm looking for the smallest number. So again, a 2, a 0, and a 7. Well, the smallest is the 0. So I'm going to put in this decimal, 27 thousandths, as my least, my smallest decimal. And then the next biggest number would be this one has a 2, because this one has a 7. So put 27 hundredths in as the middle decimal, and then 7 tenths would be the largest. For B, I have 130 thousandths, I have 13 thousandths, and 1 tenth. So again, let's look at that first place value. That's in the tenths column. I have a 1, I have a 0, and I have a 1. So the smallest will be the 0. So I'm going to put this one, 13 thousandths, in as the first decimal, the smallest decimal. The second one is a bit trickier because we have a 1 in the tenths column here and a 1 in the tenths column here. So as far as the tenths are concerned, they're equal. So we have to go on to the next spot to the right. This one has a 3, and this one has nothing. So, well, 3 is more than nothing. So I'm going to take this decimal, 1 tenth, and put it here. And then that leaves us with 130 thousandths as our largest decimal. And the last one, I have 8 tenths, 18 thousandths, and 8 thousandths. So that tenths place value, I have an 8, a 0, and a 0. Okay, well, 0 and 0 are definitely the smallest. So now I need to go to the hundredths place value. Well, here's a 1, and this one has a 0. So that tells us that 8 thousandths is the smallest decimal, so that'll go first. And then I'll put this one in that had a 1 in the hundredths, so that's 18 thousandths. That decimal will go here. And then the largest decimal had an 8 in the tenths column in that first place value, so that goes at the end.